If you have ever tried to clean up a marketing system that's gotten way too complicated, you will appreciate today's session. So if a CMO asks you to modernize their ICP in 30 days, where would you start?
So I think it's really about being able to respond to those real-time signals. And it could be a matter of, you might have within your ICP who is considered like high fit, but they're not necessarily as hot in terms of engagement. And then you might have someone who maybe is like a mid fit, but they're super engaged. And so that's where I think those real-time signals, what they're searching, or if they're doing comparisons, maybe with your particular product or brand and your competitors, being able to listen to those signals and then marrying that with the engagement is what's going to really help you make your ICP more living and not just responding to, as we called it at MAPSA, your dusty PDF.
Hey everyone, if you have ever tried to clean up a marketing system that's gotten way too complicated, you will appreciate today's session. Today we have Britney joining us, who is a Senior Technical Product Manager at AWS and a 5-time Adobe Marketo Champion, who has helped some of the biggest brands untangle their operations. Before AWS, Britney led marketing at Prudential and McKesson, where she turned messy, disconnected stacks into scalable systems that actually supported growth. She is known for building bridges between people, process, and technology, the kind of leadership that makes even complex ops feel simple. At MOPS this year, which I had honor to attend, Britney and Ellie took the stage and showed marketers how to rethink outdated buyer models and rebuild them around real data. Today, Britney will be sharing with us what that looks like in practice, from refreshing ICPs to aligning GTM teams and scaling ops without burning people out. So stay tuned. Britney is about to make marketing operations make sense again. Britney, welcome to our show.
Thank you.
Britney, let's jump right in. I want to talk to you about fixing the foundation. A lot of companies are still working from buyer profiles they built years ago, even though how people research and make decisions has totally changed, and especially with the advent of AI. Now you have rebuilt ICPs from the ground up at Prudential and McKesson using live intent data and CRM feedback. So if a CMO asks you to modernize their ICP in 30 days, where would you start? What would you do, and what data would you look at first? And how do you decide which old personas need to go?
Yeah, so I think it's really about being able to respond to those real-time signals. And it could be a matter of, you might have within your ICP who is considered like a hot or high fit, but they're not necessarily as hot in terms of engagement. And then you might have someone who maybe is like a mid fit, but they're super engaged. And so that's where I think those real-time signals, looking at what they're searching, or if they're doing comparisons, maybe with your particular product or brand and your competitors, being able to listen to those signals and then marrying that with the engagement is what's going to really help you make your ICP more living and not just responding to, as we called it at MAPSA, your dusty PDF. You're actually paying attention to what people are doing online and being able to be responsive with that, and allowing that to inform your ICP, so then you're able to actually go after those particular prospects or customers who might have not even been on your radar.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think the intent data has become so powerful now, especially with contextual intent. I really like how you kind of framed it in a way where it kind of makes sense. One source of truth, because I think marketers constantly struggle with that, and a lot of times it results into a re-platform. What I want to talk to you about, Britney, is when the CRM says one thing and Marketo says another, nobody knows which numbers to trust. You have had to fix that kind of disconnect in complex regulated environments. When you walk into that situation, what's your first diagnostic step? And what's the smallest process or technical change that you usually gets everyone aligned around one clean view of the customer?
Oh, I love that one. Yes, because I've definitely had many conversations that were just like you said. We're saying one thing, they're saying another. I go back to the data because a lot of times people can't argue with data, and not just like, I know obviously the data in CRM, there's data there, but a lot of times what I feel sales may not realize is Marketo is collecting more of the real-time data and things that are happening every day, from the emails, from the webinars that are being attended, to what people are doing on the website. And so one of the first steps that I would encourage any MOPS person to do is have a conversation and share some of that data with sales. Like, I've actually sat one-on-one with sales reps who are like, oh, we don't really know or care what marketing is doing, and actually sitting there with them, being able to show them in Salesforce, for example, there's that connection with Marketo Sales Insight, and being able to show them, like, these are all of the things this person has done. And a lot of times that's a feature that I can't even count how many times like sales reps might look over or not even know what it means. But taking the time to sit down and have that conversation and explain, this is what this means and why it's important. A lot of times I've found not only is that helpful, but then they get really excited about wanting more information and being able to track, so that they're better able to do their job prospecting and selling.
Great. That's awesome. And how do you think about this in terms of integrations, that actually help revenue? Most leaders feel pressure to connect every new tool in the stack, but not all integrations add value. You have seen that up close at McKesson and Prudential when tech slowed campaigns. Brittany, how do you decide which integrations are worth the time and which ones to just let go, or which ones that can wait? Like, which ones are the critical ones that you spend time on? Is there a framework or a simple test? Because not all situations are same, right? Is there a framework that you use before wiring a new system into Marketo or CRM?
Yes. One of the first questions I ask is this tied to a broader business goal? Because a lot of times, both marketing, sales, we all kind of report within the same company as a whole and have bigger, broader goals. And I also not only try to look at, okay, is it tied to a bigger company goal or initiative? Is it tied to an initiative that has revenue involved? Because a lot of times, to your point, there has been requests for, okay, we want to connect this. I also try to focus on, what are you going to do with that data? I would say that's the other thing, because if I am going to go through the trouble of integrating, where is this data going to go? Where's it going to live? Who's going to be viewing it? What metrics are important? Because sometimes what I found is, even if someone's requesting an integration, it might not just be an integration that's actually needed, but having that conversation to understand, okay, what is it they're actually trying to do, and making sense of, okay, does this actually benefit the company at large by doing this integration, or is there another alternative route we could reach the same goal?
And the alternative route that you look at is through the existing integrations or through like different platforms or tools?
I would say, yeah, sometimes I try to, as much as I can, use the existing platforms. And I think that gets messy, especially at the big enterprise companies, because a lot of times I'm working with stakeholders from multiple business units, and everybody's got a P card and is wanting to go buy something and integrate. And so again, I'm always big about having conversations and being able to say, okay, so you want to host a webinar. Did you know we already have this tool? It does these things. Why don't I give you a demo? Let's walk through. I think we could use this to achieve what you're trying to do. And a lot of times that has been helpful, because sometimes people just don't know. especially
Yes.
at enterprise. There's so many teams, so many silos. They don't know. And a lot of times if I give that education, they're like, oh yeah, I'm fine with it.
I think you hit the nerve on enterprise level, and everybody has their own vendor that they want to integrate with, and then it becomes a wild, wild west. So I appreciate your perspective. Brittany, I want to jump on a little bit on the scaling of the execution, right? Because now you have your system set up, your integrations done, but sometimes scaling campaign operations come at a cost of creativity. Centralizing operations sound great on paper, but it can slow teams down. You built that centralized dish model at McKesson and scaled it further at Prudential, keeping governance tight without losing creativity. How did you set that up? Like, I'm curious. So local teams
Yeah.
still can move fast, and what's like one early sign that tells you the model is starting to become too rigid?
Yes. So definitely, my time at McKesson was a great place to kind of launch that process. One of the things we had there, I mentioned before, is we had multiple business units. We were functioning as a centralized team initially, but as we continued to add additional business units from like acquisitions and things like that, suddenly our current process of submitting a ticket, following the SLA, it was more than what my team could handle. Now, we did have marketers who were eager to get in Marketo, and they're like, we could do it, we could help. And all mobs people, especially if you've been in Marketo, you don't want people that are not Marketo people in Marketo. And so I had to come up with a way to kind of bridge that disconnect, because we could use the help. Like, we did need people to build, but we didn't necessarily want them in Marketo. And we also wanted to be able to do something that would support several email campaigns at scale. So the centralized-ish approach, I like to say, is a little of both. You're not completely decentralized, but you're not completely centralized. And what it took was a combination of a good intake process with the project management tool, Marketo, as well as an automation. We had an automation between Marketo and Workfront. And then we also had a tool, you might have heard of tools like Knack or Stencil.
Yep.
We had a
We
had a
had
tool
Knack
like that.
at Mopsa.
Exactly. So using a tool like Knack, it gives that ability for the people who are not Marketo savvy to build and do their thing, and then leverage that automation to then push it into Marketo. So then my team would take over from there to actually do, all the Marketo pieces. And what we found was this was a great way that allowed us to continue to build more emails at scale. And it made both people happy, because the marketers who were not as Marketo savvy could build their emails and do all the kind of back and forth visually. And then my team, they only had to worry about setting it up and pressing go. And that building that type of workflow, it was transformative for the amount of work my team could do. We were definitely able to do more with less.
That's great. That's great. And I think as you're doing all of this, I think one thing that becomes critical, Brittany, is the reporting, right? As you're doing all of this campaign, as you're launching tough things, a lot of people then rely on dashboards to tell them, what is working and what is not, right? So I want to dive a little bit into that, like how do you make reporting meaningful? Dashboards often look impressive, but don't drive decisions, right? They're just cluster of bunch of charts. You have led ROI reporting at Adobe and Prudential that had to hold up in front of finance, right? And I know finance team can get pretty picky about the reporting. So when you're building executive level reporting, what do you focus on first? The data, the story, or the cadence, And what does the one-page view that leadership actually trust look like in your world?
Yeah, I think the data is what's most important. And I do recall a particular campaign that I had the opportunity to kind of prove ROI on at Prudential. We did a lot of events. And so a lot of times, events, if you don't have good tracking in place and reporting in place, to your point, it's very easy to go, wow, we did this event, we got 10 million impressions, all the like fluffy metrics. But what I did there, I was able to drill down into, okay, we may have, had 10 million impressions, whatever it was, but from that, how are we actually capturing leads? If any? When I dug into those details, I was able to see we had a broken process in terms of lead capture. There wasn't a way to actually know of the people who attended that event, how many now have signed up for, whatever service. And so that was like the first piece, was just identifying, okay, this piece is broken. Then once we were able to find a way to track it, okay, how can we scale this to other events so that everyone is able to actually see how many leads are generated? But in that particular scenario, it really did start with the data. And it was the data we had based on the process we had at the time, which was extremely manual. It was not automated. It was literally our advisors were handing out these little paper cards. And then you were reliant on the sales rep to come and type in to CRM what that lead was. And so that was on a dashboard. For the few that did it, I was able to show, well, this is all we've got in the system. So even if, sales is saying, no, we got 20 leads, this is all we could see. And so being able to share that, I was then able to take and figure out a way, okay, how can we actually automate this for the reps or the advisors and actually be able to track ROI from events.
That's great. I think it's a really clever way to get into making the reporting meaningful again. Otherwise it could turn into a chaos pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Campaign chaos. And I think how do you make it into a repeatable system? I have seen numerous times, Brittany, that campaign execution usually slows down. Because as you mentioned, right, like there's the people have to come in and put the notes into the Marketo, but sometimes those notes live in the brain, right? So because the know-how lives in people's head, right? So you have built enablement engines, templates, SLAs, QA checklists that help teams ship faster without adding headcount. What does the toolkit look like in practice? And how could a smaller org borrow from that playbook without overwhelming their team?
I think you have to be strict with your project management tool. Like that's really what is the starting point. And it doesn't even have to be the fanciest tool. Like I know a lot of people are familiar with Asana, for example. I think you have to really know, like kind of draw out what your campaign process is like, and have that actually implemented with it or reflected within your project management tool. So if it's, you need X amount of days to do that, all of your tasks, everything needs to actually follow what that process is. And sometimes people may think it's a bit overkill. Like I've been told that before, where my project templates, every single piece of what you're doing is a task on there. And that's for a reason, because to your point, it does get chaotic. There is a lot of steps. There's a lot of details. And this really is just a checklist to make sure that your campaign ops is able to do everything and follow a timeline.
Yeah, got it. That's great. Brittany, I want to talk a little bit about the leading transformation, whether it's strategy, whether it's AI, whether it's people. How do you get GTM teams to actually work as one, right? So we all talk about alignment, but marketing, sales, and success often play by different rules. You have bridged those gaps at Prudential, and I know you're doing this successfully at AWS, turning siloed teams into a single GTM motion. What's the first conversation that you have with your team or shared metric that changes the game?
I think initial conversations with each of these teams to understand what they do, a lot of times for me is the first step. Because again, at the big companies, everyone is very siloed. nobody like really knows what each other's doing. And so I've always been a curious person, and having conversations to just understand what different teams do, how they work, how they interact, and then from there, being a good partner to with them, especially being in MOPS, letting them know how I can support, how I can help. I think a lot of times coming with that attitude and that mindset really helps bridge those gaps, and really builds those relationships that help drive the transformation.
Got it. And how do you keep that alignment from slipping once campaigns are live? Because, you can have your initial alignment, everybody can go, but then over time it starts to slip, right? How do you avoid that slippage, once campaign goes live?
Oh, that's a good one. I think, I'm trying to think of what I've done in the past. I do think having a regular cadence to keep everyone on task is helpful. A lot of times that could be meetings, it could be Slack updates or email updates, just something that's still keeping everyone on track of like where we are at in the project. I think that communication piece is really what will help. And if things are slipping, communicating that as well. Like if the current status of the project is now, we're behind schedule, I think that's something that should be shared broadly as well, so that everybody is aware and can, do what they need to do to unblock and get back on track.
Great. No, that's a good perspective, Brittany. Brittany, I want to focus a little bit on the AI. I mean, that's like the hottest topic of, I think last 2 years, there's a lot of pressure. Do AI, leverage AI, focus on AI, how to use AI, but most ops team don't know where to start, Sitting at the intersection of Adobe's champion community in AWS, you have seen how automation and AI can really help or overwhelm a team. What's one realistic first use case you suggest marketing ops to get them started?
I definitely think I'll just use my own use case is, I know at Amazon, I have to write a lot of docs, whether that be for business requirements or sometimes just docs on proposed new strategies, something like that. And so I think that is a great first step into, if you're not really sure, what you want to do with AI. A lot of times I've used it to help me in formulating an initial draft. Not that it's doing the whole thing for me, because there's a lot obviously that it's not going to know, context and things of what I'm trying to achieve with it, but being able to format and structure in a way where I could then have that initial draft and take that and be like, okay, these are the other details that I'll add in. One other use case I think has been very helpful is when it comes to, let's say I've already drafted a doc and I try to anticipate questions, because really I want my doc to be able to communicate in a way that the problem is understood or the recommendations are understood, but that might not always be the case when you initially draft it. And so another use case is even asking AI, to read a doc and let me know what are some potential questions I might get asked. What have I not answered in this? That's another very just easy everyday use case that has been very helpful for me.
That's great. And Brittany, what guardrails should be put in place to make sure humans stay in control? Because with AI everywhere, right? You want to make sure that AI is not going rogue or taking actions on your behalf that you may have to backtrack later. What guardrails do you recommend that are being put in place to make sure this doesn't happen?
Yeah, that is such a hard one, because I feel like I am fortunate within AWS. We do have a lot of our own AI tools, so we're able to, I guess, in a way, some of the guardrails are already there. I think outside of that, it's important to educate your team on best practice and kind of do's and don'ts, because some things that you may think are obvious to, like, oh, why would you, paste the code in ChatGPT or something like that. Sometimes I think it is very easy to forget that this is like a public site. And so I do think maybe even having like a checklist or a guide of like do's and don'ts when it comes to using AI tools is one first step to put some guardrails in place and try to help your team be safe when using AI.
Yeah. You don't want to be in an embarrassing situation where all of your code is live on the public website because you choose to do so.
Yeah.
Brittany, I want to talk a little bit about the mindset, like, going from executor to strategist. So many ops leaders get stuck being the person who runs the tools, right? You have made that shift. You are a market or a manager, right? You are pretty hands-on. Now you are a director to product owner at AWS, right? Which is kind of going in the leadership echelon and not being in the hands-on day-to-day operations, right? What were the key mindset shifts, Brittany, or skills that helped you get that strategic seat at the table? And if someone wanted to start that transition today, like I'm sure a lot of managers would be listening to this, what should they be focusing on first?
Back to what I had said earlier about pay attention to the business and company goals, because that was one of the things I started, I would say, paying more attention to beyond just like, what am I doing? Looking at, okay, what are our company goals and how can we use the tech stack to reach that? That was one of the ways in my time at Prudential, when we had that use case I brought up about, the events not quite matching what we were, like the ROI basically, and not being able to track everything. That was a good example of where I wasn't exactly, asked to evaluate it that way. That was something I saw independently and partnered with that team to solve for. Because a lot of times, us being in MOPS, we know all the tools. We know how everything's connected. We know the power that it can bring. I think you really have to see those opportunities and say something. Don't just be like, oh, they're not tracking this. Make a case for it. Make a business case. Make a presentation of, hey, this is something I noticed, and here's a way we could solve it. I think that's the biggest thing, is having that problem-solving mindset and being able to communicate that to leadership. That's really what helps you make that transition from just being a day-to-day executor to a more, strategic role.
Can this skill set be easily acquired, or the mindset be easily acquired, or how do you like train your brain on that, or do you have to grow up with that mindset, Brittany? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know if I wouldn't say it's something that probably comes natural to everyone. I do think, I know in my time when I managed my team at McKesson, I always challenged them to think beyond just what they're doing. And fortunately, I do think I've had some good managers at the last few companies I've been at who have also been key in helping even me change my own mindset and thinking bigger. But I don't think it's necessarily something that just comes to you. But that's what I would challenge any MOPS person, is you have to think bigger. You have to think beyond just the tools and actually focus more on, okay, what is the business trying to do? And then be that bridge between, the tools and the people.
Great. I know we're talking about MOPS, right? So we can't not talk about automation, right? So leading through automation without burning people out, Brittany, like I know automation helps scale, right? But it also raises expectations. You have in your time at, McKesson and other places led through various transformations and still kept your teams engaged without burning them out. What are the practices or habits that protect your people? Whether it's how you manage workload, how you create growth plans, or how you decide what not to do, and how do you keep that balance when everything is moving so fast?
I definitely think celebrating the small wins is key. especially because some of these projects are large scale and have very long timelines of when we'll actually say it's launched. And so I think you have to celebrate even the small things that you're accomplishing throughout that project along the way. And I would say the other thing that's very helpful just to keep your team engaged and motivated is taking time that is not focused on work necessarily. Maybe it's like a Friday afternoon chat where you guys discuss, I don't know, the latest Netflix show or something like that.
Right?
Yes. I think a lot of times that actually, it helps people feel connected and it helps keep them engaged and gives kind of a moment to reset.
Right.